Welcome to Backstage at the Enharmonic. I'm your host, Sean J. Kennedy. Today's guest is Mark Amentt. In this episode, Mark tells how he started his musical life as a self-trained drummer and following his dream to become a leader in the music industry. I hope you enjoy this episode of Backstage at the Enharmonic. Hey, Mark, this is Sean Kennedy. Are you there?
Sean, how are you? I'm doing well. Yes, I am here.
Excellent. Great. Thanks for taking some time to be on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity. I'm flattered that you would ask. So I'm looking forward to this. Thanks.
What is your earliest memory of music, and what impact did it have on you?
Earliest memory of music was frankly from my growing up in Northeast Philadelphia, where I had an older brother and sister that were heavily into Motown and eventually into the Beatles. So there was music around the house because of them. My father also did a lot of things at the local grade school, and while he was not a musician, he loved to sing. And those were probably the earliest memories. And I remember basically hearing all this music in the house, realizing, what an impact it had on me, and started to find a way to get involved in that music, and actually began playing drums at the age of 6.
And was that informally? Did you happen to have a drum set around the house, or did you ask Mom and Dad to get you a drum set?
I asked them to get me a drum set, and what they did was they got me a snare drum. And I had a cousin who was a drummer that played in a couple of music combos around the city. And he gave me a really, really old cymbal. And I remember putting the cymbal on a table and having the snare drum and playing along to records. And that's how I started. So there was that, plus there was really no formal training. As a matter of fact, the funny part of it was when I wanted to sign up and play at school, they said, we have too many drummers. You're going to be a trumpet player.
Wow.
And I did not want to be a trumpet player. So I wanted to play drums. So I kind of shied away from that. And I actually never had formal training until after high school.
On anything, you mean? On any instrument at all?
Nothing. No. And basically taught myself how to play several instruments after that. And the more formal lessons actually came in maybe about 20 years ago. So, for 30-some years, I never took a lesson. But I had a lot of books. I did a lot of reading. I studied, a lot of different, techniques. And it wasn't until I really started to play upright bass that I realized that I had to have more of a formal training, not only for the mechanics of playing the upright bass, but because I was learning so much on my own, I began to realize what I didn't know. And it's one of those funny things. And you know this. I mean, you're one of these guys that's always looking for some way to learn more. And when you do learn more and you get better at your craft and your instrument, you become humbled by how much you don't know. And that was the case with me for sure.
I think you learned skills that guys who had formal training haven't. So it's just like, where are you going to start? You're going to do self-training or go technique-wise, and a lot of guys that have technique can't play by ear. So it's interesting to me how different people get into the business and start playing, whether it's formal lessons every week with a teacher or your teachers. Your teachers were actually Motown artists, I guess, listening to records.
Yeah.
You mentioned your family, your siblings. Did they continue with music themselves?
No, nobody else in the family played. Only my cousin, who was a drummer. He was the only musician that I knew in the family. Now, what's interesting is that on my mother's side of the family, I had cousins that were my age that played. I had one cousin, Danny Kelly, who was an excellent guitar player, and when he would come over during holidays, we would play in the basement. I'd sit there with the snare drum, and he'd have his guitar, and we played, some Motown tunes, we played some Beatle tunes and things like that. And I began to actually really, I guess, formulate a style based on those kinds of tunes. Later on when I got my first drum kit, which I remember I think it was made out of cardboard, to be honest with you, with plastic rims. But that's where I actually learned how to tune the drums, which I found to be very valuable later on. Of course, over time I was bending the plastic rims, but it kind of blossomed from there. And as a percussionist yourself, although the hidden secret behind Sean Kennedy is that, Sean, you were a piano player before playing drums, and you have that background, which is invaluable. I kind of did it the other way. I started to understand a little bit of music theory after I was playing drums for a while, but managed to be able to fit all that stuff in. So this without any real prodding or I guess people to look up to in my family specifically, as musicians. But I am very thankful that my parents realized that I loved this and I had a passion for it, and they supported it. And that's a big piece of this, is having that support mechanism. Whether it be family, friends, or whatever, you have to be persuaded to continue your passion, and that's really important.
Oh, exactly. Especially, I find, from my personal story, from having hundreds of students over the years, it's the arts. You really need that foundation, because a lot of times when kids even have an inkling of going into the arts, the parents and the relatives and the family friends around, just having that positive voice going, yeah, you should keep trying it, keep doing it, that is so valuable. Because I don't think in most other career paths we need that. Like if someone said, I'm going to be a doctor, I don't think you'd have many people going, oh, don't go into that. But if you're like, I want to be a musician, it's always like, ooh, really? Is that a wise choice? And just that one voice saying, I think you can do it, it's so invaluable for young people.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so easy to be dissuaded. It's also very challenging. It's funny. I'm in the middle of reading the Bruce Springsteen autobiography, and I see so many parallels with him and how he grew up. And he did a similar thing to what I did when I was younger. When I first decided that, okay, I love playing the drums, but I want to learn how to play the guitar. I remember the first guitar I had, it was so frustrating, I just put it away. And that was the same thing he did. He gave it up. He said, that's it, I'm not even going to do it because it was so frustrating. But then later on, you get inspired by somebody, or somebody, edges you on or eggs you on. And you decide, you know what, I'm going to hunker down, I'm going to learn how to do this. And, that inspiration, coupled with the failure and the belief in yourself that you're able to do something, is really a good foundation in any kind of, personality of a young person, older person, whatever. Adversity is one of those things that we're going to face all our lives. If everybody tells us we can't do something, we're never going to do anything. Fact of the matter is that you have to drive yourself and challenge yourself, and you're going to fail, but you're also going to win, and that's pretty important.
Oh yeah, definitely. Just showing up and sticking with it is probably the fundamental thing to success in any career. You just have to keeping on,
Yeah.
So when I first met you, I knew you as Mark Amentt, the bass player. So most of the interview so far has been about drums. And now, of course, I've known you for a long time. I knew you played drums. But when did you become Mark Amentt, the bass player? Like, what was the transition from drums to you really pursuing bass full time?
Well, in between that, I played guitar for about 15, 20 years. And I played in a lot of different bands. One band, I lived on South Street in Philadelphia for a while, which, at that time in the 80s, was a pretty fertile ground for some great original music. And played in a band called The Cousins, and actually fronted the band, played guitar, sang, fronted the band. And did that for a bunch of years. And I was an okay guitar player. I could play rhythm, no problem. Solos were kind of interesting, again, being self-taught. I was utilizing my ear. I would do a lot of, chord shapes in my solos and things like that. But how I got into bass is kind of a funny story. A buddy of mine calls me up. He said, "Hey, listen, got us a gig. Here's the date. Are you available?" I said, "Yeah, no problem." I said, "What kind of gig is it?" He said, "Well, it's country western." And I'm like, I'm not a big fan of country music. He said, No, it's easy. It's real easy, man. There's charts. Everything's written out. It's fine. You'll be fine. Like, okay. A week and a half before the gig, he calls me up and he said, I forgot to ask you, do you own a bass? And I said, what? I said, well, I have a bass. It's like missing a pickup, and I use it to record, like to throw down ideas and stuff. I said, why? Why are you asking me? He said, well, you're playing bass on this gig. And I said, I don't play bass. And he said, you do now. And that's how it started. And I remember my wife being very supportive. She said to me, you don't have an amp, you don't have anything. And I said, well, I can borrow an amp. She said, but that bass, is it going to be okay? And I said, well, it's not the greatest bass. So she let me go out, and I bought a 62 Fender Jazz reissue, which I still have. And I remember doing the gig, and I borrowed a Sun amp. I guess it was like 410s and a head, all tube head, weighed a ton. And I remember playing, and I thought, man, this is awesome. It took me right back to playing the drums, which, you have that foundation in you, and it's a driving thing. When you can get back to that, it's very rewarding. And I thought after that, I said, okay, that's it. I'm playing bass. And for years, I still got calls to play guitar, and I turned them down. I just wanted to play bass. And it kind of took off from there. There was such a connection between the drums and the bass, and I could see and realize that I decided to really, go full hog in the bass. So, 25, 30 years later, here we are.
And it's funny that you mentioned the connection between drums and bass, because a lot of bass players I know are ex-drummers. Like Will Lee, the legendary Will Lee. He started as a surf rock drummer, and then he went over to bass. Speaking of basses, I've been to your house a number of times, and you said back, your wife said, go get a bass. Could you just tell the listeners how many basses you have in your house now?
Well, okay, so let me frame this by saying this. I'm left-handed. So when you're left-handed, the options are slim. There's not a lot of instruments that you can find, let alone, instruments that you would love to have. So as an example, as a guitar player, I've never played a Les Paul, because a left-handed Les Paul is very difficult to come by. So I always played Fender guitars, among others, Ibanez, but because they were friendly to left-handed players. So currently in the arsenal, and I've actually, believe it or not, sold a couple, I have 32 basses. 32.
Wow. And is that a mix of electric and uprights?
I have 3 acoustic uprights, one which I'll probably sell because I don't need 3 for sure. And I have 2 electric upright basses, one that I use fairly regularly. And the rest are a combination of, 4, 5, 6-string basses, some fretted, some fretless. Because I work in the industry, I'm very fortunate. I have opportunities to see these basses and also, purchase them. And some of them are sort of rare, and I'll never see another bass like it again. So that's why I'm reluctant to sell some of them.
Right.
But the other thing that ended up happening is, and you'll appreciate this because you've done a lot of studio stuff. When I was doing, and I don't do that much of it anymore, but when I was doing some studio work, you get hired by a client, you go to the recording studio, and they have a song in mind, and I would bring 6 or 7 basses. And I would ask them questions. I'd say, so tell me what you heard in your head when you wrote this song. What were you thinking of? And they would always refer to either an artist or a specific song. And out of one of those 6 or 7 basses that I brought, it was typically one of those basses that was actually on that record. And I would pull that out, and I'd say, so you're looking for this. And I'd play it, and they're like, yeah, that's it exactly. So that was a benefit of having all those basses as well. I realized, how different, the sounds are, which, it's interesting to me. You look at people like Jocko. Jocko has a sound in his fingers. Ray Brown had the sound in his fingers. They can make any bass sound like them.
You've played with artists that I've played with, and I've been in charge of booking the band, so I hired you for bass. And I don't even know if I've told you this in person, but on a number of occasions, the artist wants to come back and do the same type of presentation, and they said, who's going to be in the band? And I said, well, maybe I can get some of the same guys. And on more than one occasion, they've said, can you get Lefty on bass? So my question to you is, being a left-handed bass player, has it been a hindrance or a help or neither for you as a professional musician?
Neither, because I didn't know any better. It's so funny. Sometimes ignorance is bliss. We talked earlier about, people being supportive. Nobody ever told me that I couldn't play left-handed. That's pretty important. Went to 12 years of Catholic school, and they joke about, being, writing left-handed, and they'd hit you on the knuckles with a ruler. That never happened to me. I wrote left-handed. Although oddly enough, I'm ambidextrous. I eat with either hand. I throw with my right hand. I play golf right-handed, but I write left-handed, and I play instruments left-handed. Even my drum set, my first drum set, which I still have, instead of 58 Slingerlands, I modified them to be left-handed. So it really has not been a hindrance. Where it becomes a hindrance, which is kind of funny, is that sometimes if there was one person in particular, I won't name names, but I wanted to study with him, and he said, I can't teach you, you're left-handed. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, everything's backwards. I said, well, really, no, it's not. It's like you looking in the mirror. And ended up not studying with that person, which is okay, but it was just too foreign for them, and I think they were more classically trained. That's why it was, kind of a problem for them. But the other thing that I found interesting, where could be a hindrance, but it's also kind of fun. It's not uncommon for me to go to a club, see a band play, and they want me to sit in. Now, I never presume, and I would never walk in with my axe to watch another band play, because that's just not cool sometimes to do that. So I'm forced to play a right-handed bass upside down, and whether it be a jazz. I mean, at one point I actually did a jazz. It was on a jazz gig. I played an upright upside down, which was very challenging, but it makes you think about the instrument, and it makes you very selective in the notes that you're going to play, because you literally have to think about every note. And so nothing comes real natural. It's upside down, even though I'm left-handed, I string my bass the traditional way, with the lower tone string, E, A, D, G, closer to me, not upside down. So that's always been interesting. That's where it's been somewhat of a hindrance. The only other thing is that I was told by an upright player that I would never be invited to play in any kind of orchestra because I'm left-handed. And I said, well, why is that? He said, because you'd be stabbing everybody with your bow, which I never thought about. I'm like, oh, I guess so, because everybody's right-handed. They're going a certain direction. I'd be, stabbing them with my bow because I'm bowing with my left hand. So
put you on the end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're one of the busiest musicians I know who plays all the time. However, you have a full-time job in the music industry as well. So could you give us a little bit of the bridge between you being a hobby musician as a teenager, starting to become a professional musician, going to college, getting out? How did you become such a, a bigwig in the music industry? I guess that's the best way I can say it.
Yeah, well, the way my hair's falling out, soon I'll need a wig, so that kind of wig fits. But I don't know about big wig. But thank you. It's funny. When I played, and I obviously started playing at an early age, I didn't realize, frankly, I was naive. I didn't realize that I could have gone to school for music. Now, there would have been a process, obviously, to do that, and to get into college and play music. And I didn't do that. I didn't take that route. But I still played all through college. And I remember vividly actually playing at places, down in Kensington and all that, gigs Wednesday through Saturday, and going to school the next morning. That's part of how I paid for some of my college. But I always had that music background. I always wanted to do something with music or in music. And once I got out of college, I didn't follow any kind of, musical path. I still played, but I didn't do anything in the music industry. It wasn't until a bunch of years later, and actually 17 or so years ago, where my wife and I were talking about it, and I said, I don't love my job. I worked in the pharmaceutical and publishing industries for a long time, and great place to work, great place to be. Money was great, opportunities were great, but I didn't love it. Just didn't love it. And at the time, my wife had gone back to school to become a teacher, and in the middle of that, she got her master's degree. We had our first daughter was born. She graduated with a 4.0, landed a job as a teacher in a local school, got a contract, which was unheard of at the time. And it was inspiring to watch her do that. We supported each other. We ate hot dogs for about 2 years while she was doing that.
Right.
But, that was something she wanted to do. That was the passion. So when I said to her, I don't love my job, she said, well, why don't you find something in the music industry? So, you have that kind of support. I ended up going to the NAMM show 17 years ago, the summer NAMM show, actually. A buddy of mine, Paul Specht, who has since passed away, worked for Ibanez, Hoshino in Bensalem, Pennsylvania, and got me a visitor badge. I remember going there with 300 resumes, 3 of my best suits, stayed at the seediest hotel I ever stayed in my life. And I remember he gave me some pointers. What I did was there was evidently a hot spot where everybody had breakfast before the show opened. So this was like, after work on a Friday, I fly down there Friday night. Saturday morning, I'm in this place, and I'm looking at all the name tags, and I'm writing names down. So I go, and I seek these people out. And I told my story, and I said, listen, I'm interested in doing something in the industry. Can I give you a resume? This will kind of, give you an idea of the time frame of this. This is before cell phones. I actually carried a pager with me, and on the resume was my pager number. And I said, if you want to meet with me, page me with your booth number, and I'll come by, immediately. And I did that for a couple of days. I did it, Saturday, Sunday, and had a couple of interviews actually with a couple of companies. And one company sort of, made a pitch for a job. There was more that would have to be done. I'd have to go through a process, but they had an idea for me for an opening. But it was moving to an area of the country that I was not really that interested in. So a couple months later, I get a call, and I find a position with an organization called the Alliance of Independent Music Merchants, and started working with them. Now, the interesting thing about the music business and being a musician and working in the music business is that there's that common thread. Common thread is music. We all have this passion and this love for music. So I remember vividly being on a gig and playing on stage and literally looking down at the floor and giggling, because here I am playing music, and I just landed a job in the music industry. And I thought, talk about having your cake and eat it too. And, that was 17 years ago. I was at AIM, the Alliance of Independent Music Merchants, for 10 years. And then, I've been with Casio America now for a little over 6 years. And I have to tell you, I love my job. I'm doing stuff in the music industry. We're helping to create more musicians. Deeply involved with education, with House of Worship, running the music dealer and piano dealer channels in the United States for Casio. And it's a very rewarding job. But here's the interesting twist. We talked earlier about, support and people giving you encouragement. Casio is one of the few companies that I've worked with in my entire life where the management team, my coworkers, there's a wonderful level of support. So part of that support includes, me continuing to play music. So it's encouraged. Obviously it doesn't get in the way of my job, and in many ways it enhances it, because when I go and I speak to a school, I'll find that some of the people that teach at the school, I play in big bands with them, on the weekends. Some of these band directors, or I'll go to a gig and there's somebody that works at XYZ Music Store, So when I go and I visit these stores, or when I go and I talk to these educators, they all know that I play. So it's not like I'm some suit walking in saying, hey, blah, blah, blah. It has more impact. And I have to keep playing just to keep that kind of credibility. At the same time, I still love to play. I always love it. Like you mentioned earlier, I do quite a few gigs, and I'm very, very fortunate. I get a lot of calls, and it's for a lot of different things too. It could be big band, it could be soul and R&B, it could be rock, it could be anything, singer-songwriter stuff. But I love it. And, for the same reasons that you do it, Sean, we have that passion. So when you have that passion and you're passionate about music, if you can find passion in your day gig as well, man, what a great combination. I mean, look at what you do as an example. And I know you're interviewing me, but if not everybody knows who Sean Kennedy is, they should know, because you're probably one of the more remarkable people that I've met in the industry for a lot of different reasons. And you have a passion and you have a drive. So you talk about the things that I may be doing and having, my cake and eat it too, and burning the candle at both ends in the middle. You do the same thing, but you do it for the same reasons I do. You're passionate. And that's a hard thing to find. Think about, anybody and everybody who goes to work every day without passion. How sad is that? So,
exactly.
Yeah, we're lucky people, man.
That's right. A lot of my listeners are probably young. Do you have any advice for them if they are interested in getting into performing as a musician, getting in the music industry?
One thing I would say is always follow your dream. Follow your dream, follow your passion. But be intelligent about it as well. Understand what you need to do to fulfill that dream and to fulfill that passion. That would be the one thing. The other thing is that be creative with your opportunities. If you sat down right now and put pen to paper and wrote down how much money you would make annually just by playing music, it's a frightening number that would pop up because it's typically not enough to have or to make a decent living. Certainly if you want to support a family, if you're going that route later in life. But there are other opportunities, and you should explore them. So being creative with other opportunities means looking at things like I do, work in the music products industry, work at a music store. You have to be able to be self-sufficient and be able to make a living so you can support yourself, so you can feed yourself, and eventually, if you need to, feed your family. But there's more than just playing in the industry. There could be studio work. There could be teaching. There could be a lot of different things that you could do. I mean, I'm a good example, of someone that tried to figure out a way to have their cake and eat it too. I wanted to still play music, and I still wanted to make a living to support my family. And there is a way to do that. You can do that. But you have to be driven, and you have to be disciplined to be able to do that effectively. But it can be done.
Excellent. Perfect. And you're a great example of that. And I hope my listeners, get to come see you play sometime or check you out. I know you've been interviewed by NAMM, and you're on their website, and you're always available for questions. So what I'll do when I post this podcast is maybe I'll put some contact info for you. And if folks have questions, they can follow up. They can follow up with you about anything that we talked about. As always, thank you for being a great friend. Thank you for your support with everything that I do, and for being a great role model for young people going into the music industry.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity. And the passion thing's important, as you know. Both of my daughters are following their passion, and we support that. And obviously, it's in the arts. So follow your passion, because you don't want to wake up someday with regrets.
Mark, thanks again for taking the time to be on the podcast, and I hope to see you soon.
Yep, thanks, Sean. I appreciate the opportunity. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Today's soundtrack was provided by Ramblin' Ant and the Locust Street Band, in which Mark Amentt is the bass player. The recording is available on iTunes, Amazon, and all other music retailers online. For more about Mark Amentt, please visit the links below this podcast. and thanks for listening.